morning about being in it for the long haul. You're not one of those who's a fair weather Christian, are you? Bye, hon. See you later. Not one of those fair weather Christians, are you? I hope not, anyway. But believe it or not, we have some of those around. When the going is good and everything is fine, they're all happy and joyful and be there every Sunday. And when the going gets rough, why, they find their places in other places, themselves in other places. What the other pastors don't know is that after a while, as things don't go well there, why, they'll find another place and go there too. One of the things that I've made a policy in my life has been that I have never encouraged anybody who was a member of another church to come to our church. Never done that. We have welcomed them. Anybody comes in here is welcome. But I personally have never encouraged any one person who has been a member of another church and still a member to be a part of another church. We need to learn what it is to be in it for the long haul. You know, when the going is good, I'll be there. And when the going is not so good, I'll be there. And when the going is going terrible, I'll still be there. Can you say that? I'll still be there. Because after a while, in any situation you can find yourself in a church or anywhere else, it will change. Give it a little time and it'll change. It changed once, it'll change twice. It changed twice, it'll change 3 times. Give it a little time, it will change. Wayne Price tells a story of an Australian football team by the name of the Swans. The Swans had a huge stadium, and it was a rugby. Of course, they played rugby, but they call it football. And they had been down and going down for several years. But all of a sudden, they got a new coach. When they got a new coach, they got some new players. And the first thing you know, the stands that were empty began to fill up again. The Swans went on to become a national champion. You could hardly buy a ticket anywhere to go to a Swan game. And a TV reporter said that he was running the television for the Swans, and as he moved around the stadium, he looked in the back of the stadium, and he saw there a man holding up a sign, and the sign said this: "I was here when nobody else was." You get that? I'm here when the Swans are up and going, great guns. But I was here when the Swans were not doing very well either. Probably the only one, he said, who's here. And so we work that through. It reflects about being fair weather people in the church and out of the church in the world today. Jesus said to the disciples, I'm going to the cross. I'm going to die for you. I'm going to die on a cross. I'm going to be raised from the dead. And I'll go to be with my Father again. And they that were following him in great hordes, believed they were, suddenly realized that he wasn't what they expected, you know. And so they began to find fault with this, that, and the other. And then they realized he was not the type of person who had come to deliver them from the Roman government after all. In fact, he came to die. He didn't come to live. He came to be defeated. He didn't come to have victory in his life over the Roman government. He came to die for the peoples of the world. And Jesus said, many of them who heard him speak these words turned and walked away into darkness. Can you think of that momentarily? Many of them who heard him turned away and walked into darkness. Now, we need to know what the few who were left were thinking. And Jesus said to the disciples, are you going away too? And Simon Peter, though he was up and down and in and out, was steadfast and said to Jesus, Lord, to whom can we go? There's no one else to go to. And Jesus praised him and thanked him for his faithfulness. Now, Albert Schweitzer, many of you have heard of Albert Schweitzer, and you know he was one of the great missionaries in our church. He spent years in Africa praying and working as a medical doctor for the peoples of Africa. One day he came home on leave and he was being interviewed by a television humorist. And as he was being reviewed, this reporter said to him, you know, I would like to be exactly like you are if I could commute. I'd like to be like you are, Albert, if I could commute. There's no way in the world you could be like Albert Schweitzer and commute. That was an impossibility. Albert Schweitzer was in it for the long haul. Do you know how he got in it? He graduated from med school, and he was in the church, a Christian person in the church. He began to pray that God would send people to the mission field. And as he was praying, God spoke to him and said, Albert, will you go? And he said, yes, Lord, I will go. And so instead of opening up a practice here in this country, he went to Africa and started kennels and hospitals and all type of situations so he could aid the people in those fields. Now, one of the things that I've noticed in life is that life is a marathon. It doesn't just begin and end, oh, it may for some people, but overall it's a marathon. It means that when we begin to live for Christ in the world, we are called to go on and on, regardless of what happens. I know we all have our ups and downs. Peter had his ups and downs too. Peter felt sometimes like there was no one there but him. He felt like the other disciples weren't good enough. But yes, he was, and he did. But he worked it out with Christ, and Christ brought him to be a steadfast person in the life of the church. And so he understood that life was a marathon. The obstacles that we face in life are many. We face sickness. We face loss of job. We face broken homes and broken families. And we face all kind of obstacles in our lives. But life is such that we dare not let any of those get us down. We must keep on, keeping on, being what God has called us to be in the world today. So we know how important that is. Take a bad situation and turn it around. Or wait a while. And if you wait a while, usually they'll correct themselves and everything will work out all right. But don't be discouraged. You're in it for the long haul. That's what God has called us to be about as his people. He needs people that he can depend on. He cannot depend on people who are always up and down and in and out. He wants someone who he can depend on and know that it's there. Now, the great secret of his life is not how we began, but how we end. Yesterday, I had a funeral of a man who was 97 years old. And when I saw how old he was, and when I read his obituary, I could not believe, when I stopped to think about it, all that that man had seen and done. Could you imagine, in your mind's eye, a man who was born in 1921, started out with what? A Model T, then he went with a Model A, and then he went with a Ford and a Plymouth and a Chevrolet, small one. What was your first car? Mine was a 39 Plymouth. What was yours? Ronnie, what was your first car? What? Randy, what was yours? A what? 62 Plymouth. Joe, what was yours? Okay. Okay. Bill, what was yours? What was yours, son? Yeah, okay. Well, you can see what I'm getting at, I hope. You know, here's a man who lived all through the Depression. Now, if you know anything about the Depression, you know what a terrible time it was. And had it not been for the WPA, any of you, Stanley remembers the WPA. If you had not remembered the WPA, it was a program started by President Roosevelt to give people who had no employment at all an opportunity to do work. He didn't give them money for nothing. They had to work for it. You understand? And I remember my dad drove team to fix roads. A team, not a tractor, a team. Drove a team to fix roads for the WPA. Well, and then came World War I, and then World War II. The greatest generation came on the scene. Think of that, if you will. These people were in it for the long haul. That's the best I could have said about that person, Raleigh Donley. He was in it for the long haul, all the way through. And he lived with all of his faculties up until a year before he died. He was in it for the long haul. He continued to make contributions. Well, Donald Oakland tells about being in a boat right off the coast of North Carolina. And he said they were out a good ways in the ocean, and something happened to the boat, and the boat went down, and he and a friend were holding on to a big chunk of wood. And he said for 3 or 4 days they held on, and finally, on the 4th or 5th day, his friend said, "John, I just can't do it any longer. I'm just going to let go." He let go and died. On the other hand, John held on. And within an hour and a half or 2 hours, he was spotted by the Coast Guard. A helicopter came up, picked him up, took him back to the hospital, and he was all right. One let go and the other held on. Is there some semblance there? We are called upon to live life as a marathon. It's not how it begins, it's how it ends. And finishing is what faith is all about. Now, I'm very proud of every one of you here this morning. I'm proud because you are in it for the long haul. Whatever happens, don't let anything deter you from holding on and realizing that we're in it for the long haul. And someday, Christ will come back for us and we'll go home to be with him. In it for the long haul. Can you hear what Paul said? I've fought a good fight. I've finished my course. And henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day. I've fought a good fight. I've kept the faith. It wasn't all a bed of roses for him. There were ups and downs and in and outs, and still he held on. You remember the time Paul was in the boat and they had a shipwreck? And they thought sure they were going to perish, and Paul admonished them to be steadfast and to pray, and suddenly something happened. The storm subsided. God was there. And God who called us will always be with us. He's not going to forsake you, I'll tell you that now. You might forsake him, but he's not going to forsake you. He will always be with you and with me as he has been down to the days. It doesn't make any difference what comes or goes. He's going to be there. And that's why we need to be faithful as his people. Amen? Amen. All right. What number, Luann?